Hello and welcome to Psychology Sorted. This is the cognitive approach starter number 6 and we're going to be looking at cognitive bias. Now there are several cognitive biases. We're going to focus on 2 and they have similarities in common. So how do cognitive biases occur? Well, first of all, we are not always rational System 2 thinkers. You learnt about System 1 and System 2 thinking, and if you remember, System 2 thinking was the rational thinking. Instead, we rely on intuitive thinking and we take cognitive shortcuts, also known as heuristics. And this is what leads to cognitive biases. We often look for information that supports our beliefs, that tells us we're right, and we often base decisions on our initial impressions or information. For example, some of you might read a newspaper online or like this over breakfast. We read the news that supports our views, don't we? So now we're actually going to try a task that lets you see how one of the cognitive biases works. We'll tell you which one it was at the end. So your teacher will need to split the class into half, and the first half of the class is going to do this task. You're going to estimate the product of the numbers you see below. Easy, hey? But 1, you don't see any numbers yet, and 2, this is going to be a timed task. You're going to have just 5 seconds to do it. So here are the numbers and somebody is going to have to be responsible for the timing. Here are the numbers. Now that was about 5 seconds, so write down your estimate and don't show it to anybody. Now the second half of the class, guess what you're going to do? You're going to estimate the product of the numbers below. You also only have 5 seconds to do it. And here are your numbers. Write down your estimate and don't show it to anybody. Now the final task is to work out the average estimate for each half of the class. The half of the class that had the numbers that began with 8, and compare it with the half of the class that had the numbers that began with 1. And what did you find? Well, you should have found that those who started with 8 estimated a higher number than those who started with 1, because the number 8 acted as an anchor and made you not adjust sufficiently for the fact that the rest of the numbers were decreasing, and the number 1 acted as an anchor and ensured that you didn't adjust sufficiently for the rest of the numbers which were actually increasing. And this is an example of the anchoring bias. It was first written about by Tversky and Kahneman a very long time ago, and basically it says we base quick decisions, remember you only had 5 seconds, on our initial information. And I wouldn't mind betting, unless you've done this in a maths class already, that even though you're under pressure, you could not get the right answer. Now, for those of you who want to have a go again, or think you can work out the right answer, look away now, because I am about to give the right answer, which is usually at least double what anybody has estimated. And here it comes. How near were you? So that was an example of the anchoring bias. Now we're going to have a look at another bias. A crime has been committed, and half of the class is going to interview defendant 1, and half of the class is going to interview defendant 2. You only have to design a few questions, but first let's meet the defendants. So here's defendant 1. Bit of a shady character. And this is what the police say about him. We have serious suspicions about this guy and we need to question him. And here is defendant 2. Okay. And this is what the police say about him. We just want to ask this man a few questions. He may have seen something. And now, here is the task for you, the interviewer. If you are in group 1, you need to design 3 interview questions for defendant 1. If you're in group 2, design 3 questions for defendant 2. Don't show other people. Then compare the questions. First, have a look at the questions within your group. All of the group 2 questions, share your questions. All of group 1, share your questions. And then start looking at the questions between the 2 groups. What did you find? Did you find any differences in tone or content depending on whether you thought the defendant may have done the crime or whether you were pretty convinced he actually was someone who just may have been a witness? If there was a difference in tone or in content of the questions between the person whom you thought was probably guilty and the person whom you thought was probably innocent, then you have just fallen victim to the confirmation bias. And here's the reference for this. So here are 2 good activities that don't take very long at all, that you or your teachers can use to start the class on anchoring bias and confirmation bias, which are examples of 2 cognitive biases. Here are the references. Here is the study by Carol Hill et al. And here is the study by Tversky and Kahneman, which you can get hold of. And of course, don't forget, we talk about cognitive biases in Psychology Sorted, Book 1, pages 124 to 129. Finally, if you liked this PowerPoint presentation, you're sure to like our blog, where you can find links to both Book 1 and Book 2 of Psychology Sorted, and also links to more information on the cognitive approach.